Bom dia. Vamos agora iniciar o primeiro track do dia, com o título Reflexões on the Seat to the Seat, Reflexões on the Right to the Seat. Começamos hoje com a abertura da Raquel Henrique, uma grande abertura da Raquel Henrique, e é importante lembrar que quando decidimos escolher como track a questão do direito à cidade, foi um bocado em homenagem aos 50 anos da publicação do direito à cidade do Henri Lefebvre. Nesse sentido, recebemos várias comunicações e vamos começar com essas reflexões sobre o direito à cidade, sobre as reflexões sobre a prática, o pensamento e apropriações, e toda a questão à volta do direito à cidade. Com isso, passava a apresentar quem vai estar aqui hoje agora a falar. Começaremos pela Vanessa MELO, que é investigadora do Centro de Investigação em Arquitetura, Urbanismo e Design da Faculdade de Arquitetura da Universidade de Lisboa, não é? Depois, falará o Leon Felipe CONTRERAS, da Universidade de Leeds, da Escola de Geografia da Universidade de Leeds. Passaremos depois para INGA KOZLOVA, da Universidade Católica Ucraniana, e finalizaremos com a VIRIDIANA GOMES, da Faculdade de Economia do Estado do Porto. Passava então a palavra... Engenharia, ok. Engenharia do Estado do Porto. Passava então a palavra a Vanessa MELO. Tem 15 minutos. Como?
Hello, good morning. I'm presenting a paper which was written based on a first research developed about the current urbanization process in the Açores and its impacts, which are also influenced by the recent increase of tourism in the region. Through their analysis, I intend to identify in this insular context questions that may contribute to deepen the reflection on the ongoing planetary urbanization and the right to the city. I will begin with a contextualization of the Açores through a brief theoretical overview about the current global urbanization process and its socio-spatial impacts and its relation with tourism. I will then reflect on the right to the city based on more detailed analysis of recent statistical data available about the Açores. As expressed by Lefebvre, and also developed by other authors such as Harvey, the growing global preponderance of cities in the dominant capitalist context is associated with a gradual transformation of space into one of Polanyi's fictitious commodities, as well as becoming a key element in the process of profit reproduction, as we were seeing in the previous presentation. Urban spaces in particular become central to this process, but also, as Zukin denoted, became linked to attractive notions of development and modernization concerning both the built environment and lifestyles. In growing cities, such urbanization process based on space commodification tends to compromise the access to urban benefits to an increasing number of citizens, promoting socio-spatial fragmentation and disparities related to insufficient and inadequate housing, gentrification, and peripheralization, among others, as described by several authors. Within this process of planetary urbanization, as designated by Bredner and Schmidt, spaces still understood as rural or non-urban become integral parts of the worldwide urban fabric, as features once related mainly to urban gradually interpenetrate rural areas, and where shrinking villages also tend to become more evident. The social-spatial impacts of planetary urbanization can also be observed in more confined contexts, such as islands, where these are materialized in more limited spaces, allowing a more interrelated and integrated analysis. In the Açores, composed of 9 islands, research on mobility provides evidence of growing concentration of populations in islands with greater dimensions, centrality, and levels of urbanization, and of the population of more peripheral or smaller ones. As for tourism, it is linked to globalization and establishes a strong interrelation with space, as expressed by different authors. For Urry, echoing Lefebvre's and Harvey's conception of space, The gaze and conception of spatial features are central to tourism in modern globalized societies. For Knudsen and al., the discovery of local identities materialized in a place's landscape are another central element for tourism. In this line, tourism may promote the protection and maintenance of spatial and cultural features in the attempt to keep a destination attractiveness, as well as the revitalization of rural areas or islands, positive changes in the perception of these areas, and an increase in resident self-esteem. At the same time, tourism promotes urbanization. It is closely linked to more accommodation, infrastructure, and facilities, among others, within the logic of space commodification and its recreation for touristic consumption and gaze. In areas subject to intense tourism, several authors denounce the effects of gentrification, museumification, and Disneyfication, conducive to social-spatial fragmentation and disparities, population and infrastructure overload, and homogenization, linking to loss of authenticity and identity. The promotion of tourism in the Azores began in the mid-1990s, but was the opening of airspace to low-cost airlines in 2015 that boosted tourism growth. A study performed about the Azorean landscape around 2000 already observed changing trends related to tourism and growth of urbanization, including loss of population in rural areas, as well as alteration in productive activities, also reported by other authors. In 1968, foreseeing the growing preponderance of cities globally and the social spatial impacts it entailed, Lefebvre understands the urban milieu as central to the promotion of social equity through the conquest of the right to the city. For him, this is above all a right through which the city and everyday life in it become, through its citizens and for them, a work, governed by use value instead of exchange value, as well as an appropriation process of urban space production and of urban space itself. More recently, other authors have developed on the concept in the same line, and various social movements and uprisings worldwide remind us of the struggle for the right to the city. In the Azores, the urbanization process is still modest and its impacts on growing cities more discreet, giving little cause to expressive protests. Even so, in Ponta Delgada, the archipelago's capital, first reactions to the urban impacts of tourism growth were felt in 2017 through the project Caravana for the Right to Housing. The analysis of available statistical data shows similar demographic and touristic trends and a significant imbalance between islands. São Miguel gathers more than half of the archipelago's population and has the highest demographic growth. It is followed by Terceira, which grows at a much smaller pace. The rest of the population is unequally distributed by the remaining islands, which evidence a rather stable or slightly declining population. São Miguel also evidences the greatest increase of total visitors. A much smaller, but it's slightly growing, can be observed in Terceira, Faial, and Pico. But the other 5 islands have considerably less visitors, and their number grows at a slower pace. It is also worth noticing that Ponta Delgada city is located in São Miguel, but the cities of Angra do Heroísmo and Horta are also important cities located respectively in Terceira and Faial. A closer analysis indicates that the district of Ponta Delgada is the most populated, being followed by closer districts that have other important urban areas, especially Ribeira Grande and Lagoa, all of them growing since 1991. However, central parishes of Ponta Delgada city have lost residents since then, while more peripheral areas, as well as the cities of Ribeira Grande and Lagoa and some of their peripheries, have gained. The situation is similar in Angra do Heroísmo and Horta, evidencing a gradual peripheralization process. At the same time, Ponta Delgada district provides most of the touristic accommodation without including the houses now used for this purpose, and evidences the greatest concentration of touristic offers, especially in the city center. Again, after Ponta Delgada districts, the ones of Angra do Heroísmo and Horta provide the highest percentage of facilities and services related to tourism. In the city of Ponta Delgada, this situation suggests the promotion of gentrification processes driven by the intensification of tourism, as identified by the project Caravana for the Right to Housing. Peripheralization was also promoted by the construction of a considerable number of housing units in neighboring parishes, which seem to have been a more attractive solution to respond to housing needs from the market point of view than upgrading the older housing stock of the city center, which sometimes evidences a sign of decay and abandonment. Concurrently, the provision of more job opportunities, of a diversified land use and of leisure and fat, partly promoted by tourism, and which are also understood by Lefebvre as important dimensions of a greater right to the city, is also apparently at place in Ponta Delgada city. In this context, how can the balance between the benefits and the drawbacks be evaluated, taking into consideration the residents who moved away and those who remained, as well as short and long-term perspectives about the city development and its implications? To what extent do such new activities coexist, modify, or replace pre-existing everyday habits, lifestyles, and livelihoods? And if so, how many of these thus also interfere with the cultural identity and uniqueness of the city and steal it from their inhabitants? Similar questions can be asked for the neighboring parishes and cities of Ponta Delgada, but considering the smaller distance, spatial and temporal, between these places and the prominence of Ponta Delgada city, another questions may be raised. In a broader scale, to what extent could this peripheralization be contributing or not to a more balanced territorial distribution of population and urban benefits? In this more confined context, when talking about the right to the city, of which city and of which residents are we talking about? Data points out similar situations in Angra and Horta, but in a smaller scale and requiring further research. In the other two districts of São Miguel, further away from Ponta Delgada and more rural, main urban centers are still villages, where the number of residents have been decreasing or be kept rather stable, as in the other 6 islands of the archipelago. The only exception is the Vila of Madalena, which has grown since 1991 and is the greatest village of Pico. In all islands, the localities with less than 1,000 residents in 1991, which population has been decreasing, represent the most worrying situations. In 2011, some of these had less than 100 inhabitants. What is found in these more rural villages varies depending on location and levels of attraction, especially from the touristic point of view. For example, villages valued by tourism may evidence an increase of urban features, such as more diversified facilities and services, modern technologies and lifestyles. But the growth of tourism may also conduce to a feeling of overload, invasion, and loss of previous modes of inhabiting. Instead, more isolated villages, where tourism is giving its first steps, the anticipation of its future development may be regarded by some as a possibility of spatial and socioeconomic revitalization. In these shrinking villages, previous questions remain, but in these more rural places, I wonder if we are still talking about the need to conquer a greater right to the city. If you are talking about the right of appropriation regarding the process of space production and space itself in a context of planetary urbanization, it seems so. Nevertheless, in this case, the question about what sort of city are we referring to persists. Or, in these cases, wouldn't it be more appropriate to talk about the right to the place, and if so, of what place? In conclusion, we may say that a better understanding of who, how, and why is involved and affected by current urbanization process, including the influence of tourism on it, is central to reflect on the right to the city and must be looked upon in interrelation with issues of cultural identity and place uniqueness. The promotion of territorial balances and decentralization in a context of existing disequilibrium and relatively short distance between places, linked to a better understanding of which city and citizen we are referring to, is also worth of reflection. Finally, how rural places should be conceptually regarded within the ongoing process of planetary urbanization is also of importance when reflecting about the right to the city. This first research did not allow to consider a fundamental dimension of the right to the city, which should nevertheless be reminded of, namely the level of appropriation by citizens of urbanization process and space itself, which is central when evaluating and reflecting on all the questions mentioned before. And there's some references, and thank you.
Leon?
Well, first of all, thank you very much to the organizers for bringing us together today. I prefer to sit down here to have a sense of control. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story we created in Mexico City with some other colleagues from a specialized center in social anthropology. Right now I'm doing my PhD in geography, but this is a product of this collective process in Mexico City between 2012 and 2014, or we can say 2017. Well, this is the title, The Appropriations of the Right to the City, Polyphony, Alterity, and Coincidence in Mexico City. And what we basically try to do is to create an analogy between this music term and what we saw in Mexico City, or what we are seeing in Mexico City related to the right to the city construction process. Well, this is the overview. I'm going to tell you three main things. Why an anthropological perspective, so you can understand why we decided to pay attention to the cultural side of how urban actors appropriate, use, and mobilize a term, such a term like the right to the city. Then I will talk a little bit about Lefebvre's key concepts, but not exactly from his perspective, but which terms have been important for the urban actors in Mexico City. And finally, I will try to wrap up everything just talking a little bit about these three terms: polyphony, alterity, and coincidence. You will see some pictures, some images from different events, different actions, and different actors who have mobilized the right to the city in Mexico. Well, from an anthropological perspective, we basically try to answer this question: how do urban actors appropriate and use the right to the city? Does this keep its emancipatory nature when mobilized in a specific geographical context? How rich and diverse are the new readings of the right to the city? And which are the scopes and limitations of these interpretations and reinventions? Can we consider the adaptations and simplifications as simplifications and trivializations? Well, these are some of the questions. And basically what we want to do is to show how the right to the city operates as a socio-cultural component, as a cultural good that circulates and is transformed through its different readings. Just to borrow this expression, I'm going to try to talk about actually existing rights to the city. Well, which ended up with the publication of this book in 2017 in Mexico City as well. Well, how did this start? I told you a little bit about that. These are the organizations we brought together in 2012 and 2013. And some of these actors belong to different urban struggles. Some of them belong to the academia. Some of them belong to more sporadic or ephemeral social movements. And, well, the idea was to bring them together to discuss how they understand or they understood the right to the city in those years. And we tried to define these voices. And maybe this is a very unfair intellectual exercise because we are classifying these voices. But we wanted to emphasize one voice, which was the activist. Why? Because these kind of voices, they don't usually reach the academic publications. They usually stay just behind. although they are very important in how the city is built, how the urban struggles end in the end. And well, this is the publication again. As you can see here, some of these are old organizations in Mexico City. Some others are more newer social movements, for example, relatively new, related to mobility in the city, or more localized actors defending a park, against a mega project in the city. Well, this has to do with something. As a cultural good, the Right to the City is a book as well. A book that has been translated, that has circulated in the world, and as we can see here, at least in the case of Spanish-speaking countries, one of the first translations that we noticed that many of these organization members have read is the 1978 translation. So this is a key point in terms of how the Right to the City started to be used by social movements and academics in the Spanish-speaking world. Then we have the David Harvey's interpretations. They have been very influential, and this is important to say because it has to do with a context of urban struggles around the world, in which Mexico City is also part of it. And then we have the United Nations and Habitat discourses about the right to the city, and you can see how some of these actors have mobilized the term using this kind of combinations. So in general, what we can say is that this brought people from different political, institutional contexts together to discuss about a term and its components. We can say that this is a starting point for heterogeneity and unity in terms of urban struggles. It creates alliances, but also creates social and political distances between groups. And well, in the end, we can find these criticisms, contradictory and incomplete dialogues, and collective learnings and political alliances. So we need to, I mean, in this case, the mobilization of the right to the city is completely connected to that, but not the right to the city as a whole. So this is what I want to emphasize now. And I want us to think about the rights to the city, because it's very interesting how some of the actors in Mexico City have chosen some bits of this complex understanding of how space construction, space production works. And they, for example, have worked with the city as an the right to appropriation, utopia, totality, and urban revolution without a right to the city. So these 5 elements of the right to the city have very important for these actors to try to make sense of what they understand by the right to the city. And then we have this, and I think I have rushed a lot. Well, I'm going to try to stop a little bit more here, because, no, I just want to go back. I have some time. We know some of these terms, but I just want to emphasize this. How the city as an over has been used, I mean, is to emphasize the participation and the creative production of urban space. This is about the dreams, the desires, the wishes people have in the city. The right to appropriation, it has been mentioned before, has to do with the efforts to be against the exclusionary effects of today's space production. The utopia, a very complex, elusive term, but it's still about the possible urban futures. And these urban actors have been working with that. Then we have totality, which has to do with the academics, mainly with the academics. But as we can see, for example, in the writing of the Mexico City Right to the City Charter, it has been a key idea to try to combine rights, to try to put things together, and to, And then we have the urban revolution without a right to the city, which is an interesting element because it has helped us to make sense of what's going on, how the city is being transformed today, and what's missing there. So the right to the city is a key point here. So it helps us to understand, to explain our reality. And well, here I have this horrible table. This is the unfair part. This is where we try to together everything what we heard, everything that's written in that book, all the voices from activists. And I said that it is unfair because obviously there are more things, and we cannot make these very clear distinctions between actors and understandings of the right to the city. And they are not that different from other experiences around the world and other criticisms. For example, I just mentioned Lopez de Sousa work, where he's criticizing this legal and administrative approach. But in Mexico City, it has had a very interesting result. For example, and I just want you to pay attention to the second row. They try to defend the right to the city at a legislative level in the federal structures, but it didn't work. It was rejected. But later, in Mexico City, it was published as a charter, and it has been used and mobilized. It was signed by authorities, by social movements, social organizations, and it helped to have a platform that was later used, and different political actors tried to include it in the new constitution published last year as well. So this is an interesting thing because Article 12 of the new Mexico City Constitution tells something specifically about the right to the city. Then we have the second part about the specific dilemmas and challenges, and this is more about the academics, especially because they are calling attention to conflictive issues in terms of how we understand the right to the city. And for example, they emphasize that we need to have a constant comparison between normative discourses and empirical data. We have to be careful with the risk of this unifying potential of the right to the city, or because these monopolistic tendencies are still there. Who knows better about the right to the city? Or which right to the city is better for us? And well, but they have also provide elements to refine the policy-making processes, and this has helped a lot many urban groups. And finally, we have the organization's agendas. And we have fragmented and localized agendas, activism around specific problems, social, economic, educational, and cultural differences and inequalities are working there, and you can see that on how middle-class groups are defending and mobilizing the right to the city to defend a park, and how low-income groups are mobilizing the right to the city to defend, for example, to fight against a mega project. Well, so these are the three main voices we found there. Those belonging to those who believe that we still have to fight in legal terms, administrative terms, for the right to the city. Those who believe that this is more like a broad and political term that needs to be refined in many parts because of its general definition. And then we have the organizations, which are still very fragmented. But this is why I want to jump to the last part, where we try to use this analogy with the polyphony, because what we found is a lot of voices working at different levels with the term, reinventing it, adapting it to very specific conditions, and very specific disputes, temporal disputes as well, until a mega project is end or stopped, or when a battle against the privatization of a park is win. And well, we have these tendencies: hybridization, contextualization, and judicialization. These are the three main things we can interpret from these appropriations of the right to the city. And in terms of the polyphony, I would say that, well, it's a combination of parts. Because in the end, the right to the city as a discourse, as a political tool, as a legal instrument, is bringing people together. And the workshops we had in 2012 and 2013 are example of this, but only one of many. So we have all the voices there, and each one has its own spirit, its own voice, but at the same time they are talking about the same thing. But this is producing different identities, or this is helping to produce emergent identities or consolidating others, for example, with all organizations. So this is mainly what I wanted to say about this exercise we had in 2012 and 2013, and how we try to understand, to look at this from an anthropological perspective, how people adapt and react to all these terms coming from the French, from a French philosopher, and how this produces a very specific understanding of how urban struggles in Mexico City are happening right now. And well, thank you very much.
Inga?
Yes. Hello, my name is Inga, and I'm nervous. My theme is Right to the City 2017, Rethinking of Responsibility for Urban Space, case of Lviv, Ukraine. So accordingly to the State Statistics Service of Ukraine, there are 71% of Ukrainians live in cities area. So they have this right to the city, but the question how they use it. I don't want to stress a lot on the theory because I think you know it. So the author of the concepts of the right of the city is Henri Lefebvre. For him, it was a right to use the city space, right to create the city space, right to take part on its development. For David Harvey, for example, it was right to affordable housing. For Don Mitchell, right to the city, it's a right for public spaces, yes? My main point is all these authors, they are neo-Marxist. So for them, right to the city is about struggle, it's about fight. Fight between who and who, between the active citizens and cities communities from the one hand, and the local authorities and developers from the other. But is it really true in Ukrainian reality? So I want to show it to you. So I want to verify two dimensions of right to the city by Lefebvre. So it's a right to appropriation and right to participation. So when we talk about right to the city, we know that we talk about three main groups of authors: city citizens and communities, local government, and business cluster. So which resources do I use to verify this dimension of Lefebvre concept? It was sociological research, quality of life in Lviv, conducted in 2016, a list of transformed objects in Lviv for, was very bright examples for last 10 years, and database of city initiatives of Ukraine developed by such group called Mistosite or Citysite in 2016 too. So overall, there are 765 initiatives in this database. Out of these 765 initiatives, 129 were organized really in Lviv, because it's a database about all initiatives of Ukraine. So 7 initiatives were concerned with self-government, 11 with landscaping, 3 with city planning and architecture, and 5 with revitalization. So this way we have the 26 initiatives in Lviv which are working toward a transformation of the city, in particular its physical dimension. So if we talk about right to participation, how we can verify it. Right to participation is understood here as participatory practices of city dwellers. This right to participation obviously presupposes the right to take decisions which are associated with the city and its development. A person can realize this right through participation in public hearings and local initiatives, signing of electronic petition, attendance of general meetings of citizens, and so on. So, if we look at the research, what do we have? How do the citizens of Lviv use this right to participation? So 2% of the respondents took part in rallies or protest actions, 1% attend receptions of officials, 1% contacted with a local deputy, and 1% took part in public hearings from a city council in the preceding year. So this way, Harvey's idea that citizens have the right to the city but enjoy it as a beggars from a lordly table retains meaning in Ukrainian reality too. When I was analyzing these initiatives, which are actual for Lviv, I found out that right to participation has 3 models. First of all, its appropriation is fighting back without any further transformation. The second one, appropriation is fighting back and further transformation of the space. And the third, appropriation as creation and taking responsibility of a new space. Actually, the last two, it's like taking responsibility for space. So appropriation is fighting back. As I was told, I used the list of the bright transformations of the city. So it was 11 objects there, and it was government and development want to transform them, but communities don't want to. Yes, it was a resistance, and in 3 cases, it's community wins. Yes, but how it ends? So. It's a buildings almost in the city center of Lviv. So here it was old residential building. It was old, nobody lived here there. And near it was a children yard. In 2010, city government decided to build their hotel because in 2012 we have a Euro 2012 in Lviv, yes. So we have the resistance of the community, and building was stopped. But now it looks like this for 8 years. So it's stopped, it's frozen, but it's empty space almost in the center of the city. The second case, it's very old photo, it may be 1995, but for me it was, I want to show you these buildings. So these buildings, they was destroyed by fire, and it was a couple models of the transformation of those buildings. So this one, it's a bank. It was resisting of the community. They don't want it to be built, but it was really built. But this one is just project. It was frozen too. It's so we have an empty space here too, yes. So we have this new building, and we have this empty space. This is how it's like from the inside. So it was the first model, because, fighting back and light it how it was. The second is fighting back and further transformation of the space. So we have a list of initiatives, city initiatives who work in this direction. It's they called Levantivka Park. It was case when the citizens of Levantivka is a district in the Lviv. They opposed to the constructions of the residential building in the park zone. Works towards the amelioration of the park were initiated. The second one, the Give Lviv Back to Us. Its initiative is concerned with the renewal of work and rethinking of the space of one of the oldest cinemas in Lviv. Another one initiative is called Group 109. So it's such an initiative who help other initiative to make some changes in the space. So they make a design of a public spaces. And maybe the best example of what I want to stress is how was created a public organization Better Sikhiv. Sikhiv, it's district in Lviv too. So at first, activists, they wasn't activists, they was just habitants for this moment. The organization protected their public space from a developer who planned to build a quite big mall in this place. Since May 2014, there's an abandoned square turned into the building site. The community started fighting to organizing a lot of cultural events, waiting for the final orders, because it was a court for this place. The citizens collected the money, more than 200 hryvnias, installed garbages, bins, benches, and figure of Maria, Mother of God, planted trees and flowers. So together with the urbanists from this group of 109, they worked out a modern project of the new public space called the Square of Dignity. So how this place looked like before, yes, when it became turned to this building site, and how it looks like now. So it's project, and it's how it looks like now. So we have a list of the last type of appropriation. It's a creation and taking responsibility of a new space. So the initiative YOTA is initiative group organizing a Pidzamchi neighborhood festival. Pidzamchi is another district in Lviv. The goal of this festival is the creation, provocation of the social changes in this district. Why? Because it's a very interesting district. There was in 18th century, exist first plans in Lviv. In the time of Second World War, there was a Jewish ghetto, but now it's a very depressing district. So it's very low qualities of life and so on. So this initiative group, IOTA, they also associated with the transformation of the Powidlo plant, jam plant, which is situated in Pidzamchi district, into a creative space for carrying out art project. So this jam factory, how it looks like castle, and it's how it looks from the inside. So it's not really good conditions, but it's an old place, what use it for some creative for performance, for theater plays and something like this. So I have another cases. Okay, I will show the last one for economy of time. So appropriation as a creation and taking responsibility of a new space. So participants, we have the initiative Dog Friendly City. Participants of this initiative united the efforts of the community, government, and business to create the first in Ukraine dog park with trained equipment. About this thesis of the Lefebvre and Harvey and Mitchell about the opposition of local authorities. So we have in our city council, we have such a department who works with actually with public city spaces. So this department created in 2014, and they have two main goals: to work with public spaces and make show up the quality of life, up the quality of this. Of these places, and involve citizens in the process of the creation of these spaces. So it's one of the example of this realized project. So it's a street in the center of the city. So it was like a parking place. Now it's place for walking. Yes. So for the conclusion, first of all, the very subdivision, as for me, subdivision into appropriation of the right to the city, appropriation and participation as dimensions of right to the city, for me is blurred, because we have such practice which can be listed in that part and in that part. So this dimension of appropriation is too it's too difficult too. It's not about appropriation. It's not just fighting back. So it have a real different models. So here's not simply that the right to use. So okay, this the last model what we was talking about, when we do something with this place and take responsibility of ourselves. It's very, I don't know, for me it's very important in our conditions. So here there is not simply the right to use that belongs to the community, but it's the right to create something new. This last model of appropriation shows that the society is ready to move placing responsibility on someone else to placing responsibility in ourselves. So I tell it before. So maybe that's all.
Hello. Well, I wasn't prepared to talk in English, but I think that I'll make this effort, as I see that some of you can't understand Portuguese. I come from Brazil, and at this moment I'm as an investigator at Universidade do Porto, at the Faculty of Engineering. So you can pass on. I'm in my scope of investigation. I brought a method of assessment of a street, and we're now studying accessibility measures inside transport engineering. So, what is the interest of doing so? We're interested in understanding the convergence of interest in these different fields, as we usually see that transportation engineering is most focused on motorized mobility, and we can see that some studies now are going to another direction in order to have a better view of the city at its local scale and mobility at pedestrian level. So I'm showing you the review of Professor David Vale from Lisbon University, where he shows that we have several accessibility measures, and it's important to stress here that in my field of research, I used to define accessibility as a physical attribute of space, while here in engineering, accessibility has to do with access to the city. So we are here talking about the right to the city, and it's interesting to see that in engineering they have this approach, and most of the times we have a bad view of this technist approach. So here we see that most of the accessibility measures, they don't consider the built space. So we have several authors listed here. You can't read, of course, but we see that we are going to understand that some of them are trying to read the built environment. And it's very important as we achieve scores of walkability, and we can define more precisely the quality of walkable space. So my goal in this research is to bring to these traditionally quantitative methods a quality approach. You can pass it, please. So my original method is called the street assessment, and it was built from a review over the work of several authors, well-known authors like Christopher Alexander and Stanford Anderson. My focus is most voted to street and public space at neighborhood scale, at local scale. And as my original work was developed in Brazil, I decided to embrace only 3 dimensions of space as morphological, functional, and social. As I understand that our cities are now developing, and we have to, first of all, measure the quality of space in these basic dimensions, so we can go further on to evaluations on other dimensions. No? So this matrix, this analysis structure was built according to this review over these recent works, and not so recent, but works of Young Gale, Janie Jacobs, all of these authors, and many others, about the attributes of inclusive spaces. Inclusive spaces here, seen through morphological dimension, means that you have an adequate and appropriate space to walk at minimum. And you have to achieve a level of assessment of the sidewalks, of the streets, and further on to analyze that in functional dimension, you have to see how overlappings happen in space. If we accept a space where people and cars can negotiate and move around space in security, well, then you have a complex space where complexity is seen here as a positive attribute. In social dimension, so when you have a place where you have signs of old population where they live in that place for a long time, and you have community life, then you have resilient space, and then you have a hierarchy of these attributes, where if you achieve the principal attributes, you can assess these other attributes that I call the derivative, but they can be, it doesn't mean that they are less important, they're more important even, but they need to, in order to exist, these attributes, the first ones must exist in space. So here, when I call accessibility inside the morphological dimension, I mean micro accessibility. This is physical attribute, okay? You can go. So I'm not bringing all this method, but we have a checklist to apply and check the attributes in each dimension. And now my effort is to build a scale of scores in order to engage to these traditional quantitative methods. It's not so easy for us to do that, but it has been a great challenge. You can pass another. Okay, this is a test that I decided to do and bring to this Congress to check at first the work we are doing in the universities in the Campo 24 de Agosto area. We're assessing 34 streets, and I decided to test just one street in the center of Porto. And Rua Bom Jardim is a very traditional street in the city, and it has, I have divided this analysis in 8 sections, so we can see that we have different situations inside the same street. Okay, can you? So these are the sections. Section number 1 is coming from Caiçá da Bandeira, and is the second section is in front of Rivoli Theatre, the municipal theatre, and then we have the second, the third, and the fourth sections that are places of great value to the city as public spaces, well recognized and assumed by the city as a whole. Pode passar o próximo? Okay. Then we have the sections 5, 6, and 7, where we have we have this traditional commercial street, and it's a place very much recognized by the neighborhood itself. And the last one, the 8th, is an exception, as it's largo, is a square, so it's okay. So this is the view of the assessment at traffic level of planning traffic level, and we see that we have a high score at the first and at the last one, as we have streets, pedestrian streets. So we decided in this method to give a high score to the streets where motorized circulation was avoided. And then if you see the sections 4, 5, and 6, and 7, you have that commercial traditional street where you still have the same model, and where the motorized transportation prevails. Okay. Well, this is the first section, is a pedestrianized section of the street. You can go ahead. And it was interesting because at functional level it had a lower score, but I want to say that although it seems to be low, we have most of the results above 2. Well, above 2 I have inclusive spaces. They are at the average. Now, if I have a score above 2, it means that I'm in a place where pedestrians have security to move. So I know that if I apply this assessment in the streets, I studied in Brazil, especially in Brasilia, where I come from, where pedestrians are submitted to sacrifices that are absurd. Well, we will have most of them above, under 1.5. So I didn't make the quantitative evaluation in Brasilia, but I intend to do that. And you can pass to section 2, where we have restricted access to vehicles. Here is Rivoli Theatre. You can go. Here is a very important public space to the city. Okay. So we have functional dimension a little bit lower because we don't have active fronts, lots of active fronts in the building. So we don't have that scale of neighborhood very well attended. And these scores are related to neighborhood level. So although we have a morphological better condition at social and functional level, it's underscore. So these sections, you can go. Okay. So at this point, what we see, come back to the photo. No? Yes, this one. Yeah. At this point, we are now at the commercial street that has not passed through renew. No, it's working as it's used to work since, 100 years ago. And you see that cars still prevail on space, and pedestrians are obliged to walking very narrow sidewalks. Come? Well, yeah. Ok. Ok. Pode passar. Ok. Uau. Devagar. Devagar. Vai. Volta. Volta. Okay. So here we have sections 5, 6, and 7 as we see the traditional street. Vai. Okay. And here we have the square, Dr. Tito Fontes, where we see space reserved for pedestrians, and we see a great renewal of space based on tourism activity, and this is the discussion we are having here today. Okay, and I brought an example. Okay, you can go ahead. Yeah. As we see that at the general evaluation or assessment of these spaces, Largo Tito Livio, Dr. Tito Fontes, received the best score as an inclusive space, and it's full of life. I brought an example. I'll be very, very short. And we have there in Largo Tito Fontes a very lively community life. And an example I brought to you is the laundry Quebra-Gelo that was conceived by several inhabitants of this place. And they say that the slogan of the laundry is that here you wash your clothes in public. So they intend to have there a space that's free to receive several different uses. You have not only a laundry, but you have also a place where they have saraus and a place where you can play games on the table, and you have a shop of clothes. And this is just to show you the social dimension of space, people at street, and life at the neighborhood scale. We have several shops and a very narrow sidewalk. And children crossing streets without any worry, and the laundry. And this is Manuela, which I brought to show you finished, and she's going to test it.
Pronto, é um espaço um bocadinho diferente. É para isso que as pessoas e a própria decoração também.
So, thank you very much. That's all.
Any question for presentations? No? Nenhum question? Questões? Não? Rapidamente, para concluir, vamos ter agora a sessão de posters, de seguida o almoço. Não sei se vocês têm uma questões entre vocês. Any question in here? Okay, thanks. See you. Bye.